My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence. My goal is to explore the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. In addition to leadership, I like to discuss mental health, PTSD, and overcoming adversity. If you have a favorite episode, I would love to hear about it. Message me through social media or my website, and I will share some free tools to help you achieve your goals. Please like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you haven't purchased your copy of my book, Fireproof, please grab a copy today. Thanks for listening. Today, I'm speaking with Vickie Lanthier. She is a speaker, author, veteran, and entrepreneur with lived experience working through adversities such as trauma, burnout, and identity struggles. In 2020, she completed a Bachelor of Science in Nursing honors program from the University of Ottawa. She's currently working on her first book, which will help readers realize that they are capable of controlling the narrative and creating a well-lived life, no matter what adversity life brings their way. Her background in the military, as well as being an avid traveler, professional consultant, and creative entrepreneur, inform her inclusive and mindful approach. And we're going to talk about not only her book and her military service, but really what a lot of people know her for is Girl Gone Good. And you can Google that and read all about it. I'm sure after hearing her talk about it today, a lot of people are going to want to go check it out. So Vickie, thank you so much for joining me today and for allowing me to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, well, let's start off with where it all began. Where were you born and raised, and what was life like for you growing up?
So I am from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and grew up in a small town and didn't really have any aspirations. Like, when the little kids, you want to be a fireman when you grow up, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a farmer, or whatever you want to be. I didn't really know where I was going until one day, my little brother came home. He decided to join Army Cadets. And he came home and he was bragging about how he got to shoot things and he got to do all these cool things. And I was the older sister. And as the older sister, I couldn't let that little shit one up me like that. So I joined Army Cadets the next day, and he quit within 2 weeks, and I stayed. And I joined the military from there, and that kind of catapulted my career and life.
And so for Americans listening, the Army Cadets is what we have here is ROTC, and we have the Sea Cadets. Yeah. And actually, I was a Sea Cadet and did the foreign exchange swap with the Canadian Sea Cadets, and actually got to go to Nova Scotia and experience Canada, or a little piece of Canada. It was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there. For us, Cadets is that program for 12 to 18-year-olds. Usually the starting gate getting into the military, but it definitely focuses on building kids' confidence and capabilities. So for me, I joined at like 14, and from there ended up going into the reserves and then the regular force.
How many years did you actually do active?
In the military, 14.
And what did you do in there?
So I was a communications specialist, I guess would be the equivalent. Over the years, it went from radios to satellites, and then we got into computers, and I decided computers wasn't quite my thing. I really liked the radios and the satellites. But for someone in communications, it was the opportunities were very diverse for us. We deployed, we had lots of opportunity for deployments and support. And, if you wanted to go parachuting, or if you wanted to go support up north, or if you wanted to do all these different things, but just the opportunities were there for us. So that's why I picked them.
And when you got out, You didn't really get out. You stayed, sort of. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a running joke that once you work at defense, you just stay at defense for forever. So I got out, wanted to, be my own person. And somehow that meant consulting back for defense, which I've been doing now for almost as long as I've been in the military. I've been out as an IT consultant for D&D up here. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the inspiration behind Girl Gone Good.
Yeah. So I started that when I got out of the military because I just needed something. And IT consulting was starting, but it actually started out as a smoothie blog, which is kind of funny, and turned into a hiking resource, like a local hiking resource website. And it turned into what I needed. It turned into community. It turned into a way to pay it forward. I ended up writing a local trail book for here and ended up donating 100% of the proceeds to either mental health or conservation charities. So for me, it was the outlet that I was missing after leaving the military, and I just created my own community.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, talk a little bit about the hiking resources, because when we talked before, I mean, I really had no idea about the hiking trails and how up there really wasn't any resources like maps and stuff like that.
So there is a lot. It's just spread out. So for us, there's not a one-stop shop to look for trail information up here because all the trails are like the trail managers are either at different levels of government or sometimes they're public lands open to, or sorry, private lands open to the public, or maybe it's a land trust. So they all have their own sites and trail maps and trail information, but it's not standardized and it's not in one location. So for the region, we got stuck always hiking the same trails, and those trails would suffer the consequences of having so many people go on them all the time. And I thought, well, that can't be right because I know that we have a million other trails available to us. So that's what I did. I just wandered the countryside and the internet and compiled that list and tried to spread people out while teaching responsible recreation.
Let's talk about your book and what inspired you to write your book.
To segue from nature to the book, what I love about going out hiking and being out to nature is probably the same thing that everybody else loves. Like when we're in our everyday lives, it's a big life, it's a busy life, it's a noisy life, and sometimes we get lost in it. But if you go into nature, everything is calm, the noise goes away, we have clarity, we feel connected, and it's just it's rejuvenating for the soul and our well-being. And I feel like that's what gives us the energy to come back to this busyness of the everyday. So through that, I wanted to write a book. It took me years to figure out that maybe I could write a book. I think we all have a good book in us. And I really want to write a book. The core message of the book is that adversity isn't running the show, you are. And I wanted to write a book for people who want to live a big life, but feel like they can't catch a break amongst the busyness and the noise and the everyday. And create a space and permission for them to take control back in their own lives against adversity, that adverse events don't stop us, that there's a way to digest it and there's a way to get through it, and that it's a part of life. It's not one or the other. You're not stuck in well-being or you're not stuck in adversity. It's both, and that's what creates your big life.
Can you talk a little bit about the structure of your book and what it is that your primary focus is and who you're writing the book for?
Yeah, so I really am writing for everyone that wants to live a big life, but feels
Oh,
like
I'm
they can't get
sorry.
it right, right? Yeah, no, that's okay. We'll go back to that. But the structure of the book, so when you go to the mountains, and it's the same thing I just like almost what I just said about hiking, but when we go to the mountains, everything goes away. And for the military folks in your audience, when you go on deployment, everything washes away and we're just focused on the here and now, whether it's 5 feet in front of us or the trail in front of us and the environment around us. And we feel very grounded and connected to the here and now. The book, in dealing with adversity, I'm looking at what I call a concept of radical reduction, and it's really giving people permission to dial back down to zero in order to deal with your current adversity and then purposely build back up afterwards. And a good example, a very simple example, if I took an overloaded calendar, which we all have, we're all booked in 5-minute increments. You want to see your best friend, you've got to schedule it for 2 weeks from now at Tuesday at 2 p.m. If that's overwhelming and causing you stress, start with a blank calendar. Give yourself permission to take everything off the slate, except for what's absolutely necessary, and redefine what's necessary and build back up from there. If you're going through a financial crisis, give yourself permission to maybe do something about your living arrangements, to sell what you have in your house, to seek help from organizations that maybe you would feel too proud to seek help from, and to just allow yourself to reconnect, purposely build back up, and then we could work on the things to prepare for the next adversity. I really feel nowadays that we don't have, or we don't allow ourselves to have a buffer in life. We're all operating on our max in everything. If you look at the 8 dimensions of well-being, with its finances and social and our health and our occupations, we're all maxed out everywhere. And there's no buffer for when things go wrong. And it just fries us and we're stuck in a bad place. So I want to give people the tools to deal with whatever adversity they're dealing with now, and then create this big, beautiful buffer. So when it happens again, they have that space to deal with it.
I want to talk a little bit more about your personal experience. You talk a little bit about adversity and trauma, and there's been some life events that you've experienced that have shaped who you are and really this path that you're on. Do you share any of that in your book?
I do. I share some of that within the stories with the readers. The military always makes for a colorful life. So I experienced my first mass casualty when I was 21. But even before that, while I was in cadets, I witnessed my first plane crash and had our response to that. And I think that I was 18. When I was 20, I was in a vehicle accident with a tank and smashed my face in and had to deal with that. And then by 21, I had my first mass casualty and my first child death as well in that mass casualty. And then it just seemed to go from there. So I had 3 other deployments after that initial deployment with the mass casualty, and the experiences grew from there.
And
Now,
and
yeah.
how you define mass casualty incident anywhere? Well, I mean, because there's levels.
There is. Yeah. So I think that the proper definition is whenever the demand exceeds the resources and abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
For an emergency situation. My first mass casualty was in East Timor, where there was 4 of us to deal with 30 people who went over a cliff in a vehicle that lost its brakes. Yeah. So it was a very interesting response. It was a very dynamic situation. We were thankful to only actually lose 2 people out of the 30. So that was a good outcome. Yeah, that's how I would define it.
That was when you were serving in
In
the Army, right?
In the Army.
Yeah.
So that was my first deployment, my first time being away at home, my first like everything. Very interesting. What I what I've come to have a lot of gratitude for is how much those early experiences have shaped my life today. And it almost coming full circle that now that's what I'm speaking about. Now that's what I'm writing about is, adversity and well-being. So it's really interesting how one little moment in time, 20 some years ago, could actually shape your life later. And I really try sticking to preventative and talking about preventative action, mostly because I just lucked out. I lucked out very early on with my experiences and how people nudged me along my way, that I've never had to deal with PTSD or severe mental health struggles or anything of that nature. So sometimes there's a disconnect with my fellow veterans because I don't have the same experience that they have post-event. So I can't always connect there, but I can connect on the actual event. So I try to focus on preventative. So if I had a crusty old sergeant when I had my face smashed in, and he just nudged me and he said, I really think you should go to psych. First of all, that was the late 1990s. Nobody was about mental health in the 1990s. But for some reason, he decided to suggest that to me. And I have been a firm believer in therapy and psych. And I go on my own once a year, just like I get my teeth checked or, my annual physical. And it's been a saving grace.
That's interesting.
It just, how they always say like the series of misfortunate events. I feel like I had the series of misfortunate events with the right nudges along the way and the right people to guide me along the way.
Other than therapy, are there tools that you coach people on to as preventative measures?
Yeah. So right now, I became an accidental speaker. And that's where I look at those preventative tools and sharing that with everyone. A few years ago, I ended up writing a blog post about my first mass casualty experience. And I wrote it on the Girl Gone Good website, and I now have it on my second site. And when I wrote it, there was a little bit of like that, I'm going to be sick, that nauseous feeling in you because you're sharing something vulnerable. And when I wrote it as my 21-year-old self. So it's not big fancy words. It's not nothing. I just wrote it very raw and published it. And I woke up the next day to it going around the world. It got shared in the UK and Australia and in the States, and North American Rescue picked it up and shared it. And that told me that perhaps I should be sharing more. And it just stayed there for a while until events in the States started picking up. It's really unfortunate. We used to think, let me backtrack a little. We used to think that MCIs and big tragic events were things that happened overseas, or maybe like you and your profession, firefighters would experience, but they weren't for the everyday person. But the reality is they are now for the everyday person, especially in the States. We have shootings all the time. We have bombings. We have really unfortunate events that are popping up more than ever. Then someone reached out to me and said, hey, I'm looking for someone to talk about mass casualty incidents that can talk about it, because it's very hard to find people that can talk about it and that are willing to talk about not the mechanics of the event, because we're all trained for the mechanics of the event, but how do we mitigate those negative impacts on ourselves prior and after the event? And that's the portion that I like talking to. So like you were saying, like therapy is absolutely one of the things. There are a few other tools and resources that I have within that talk, and I give the participants a handout afterwards that they could take home and do those exercises and prepare themselves. if I could communicate anything, if you'll let me share an analogy on how I feel adversity is, or how I see adversity. And this is what I want more people to understand or appreciate so that they start taking their own action against it. If we think about, it's an odd analogy, so just bear with me. But if you think about adversity like swallowing a red balloon, it's super uncomfortable, it hurts, and it's there, it's stuck in you. But you kind of get used to it. Maybe you start turning on the fan to sleep at night. Maybe you stop seeing certain people because they bother you. It's still there. And then the next adversity comes and air fills in the balloon and it gets more uncomfortable. So you start accommodating more for that stress. And maybe you stop dancing at parties. Maybe you stop going to parties altogether. Maybe you decide that staying home is the best. And then the next adversity comes and the air fills even more. And you're like, oh, I'm even more uncomfortable. Now I'm going to start sleeping on my side only. And we keep making these adjustments as more adversities and stress compound on our system. And we do this not realizing that there's a way to let the air out of the balloon. And the balloon's never going to go away. Those adversities and trauma are going to stay with us. But we can let the air out of the balloon. And there's a lot of fear. If I let the air out, if I go to therapy, or talk to friends, or go to a peer support program, or go to my health professional, God, that they're going to notice that the air is coming out of the balloon. It might hurt me. What are people going to think of that? Is there going to be like, there's all these thoughts that are preventing us from doing that. And I really wish that we would embrace more those strategic, either coping or healing, I'm not saying the word right, but those mechanisms to healing, so that we could live with that red balloon that's in us all and avoid that compounding effect of being more and more uncomfortable and having to cope more and more.
Yeah, I've never heard that analogy with the
No,
balloon.
that's mine. That's mine, but it's how my mind works with it, and it just gives that visual. I think it gives an app visual that it's with us, but we could do something about it.
The one that I've heard and used is, as a child, you got a backpack. That's your first trauma. Next trauma is, you put a rock in there. And as you go through life and you don't deal with those traumas, you're just piling rocks into that bag. And if you don't address those traumas, eventually that bag is going to bust open, and when all that spills out, it has the potential to ruin your life.
It does. Yeah. It's like a bull in a china shop whether you take the rocks out and dump them or let the air out of the balloon, instead of just taking one rock out at a time or letting a little air out at a time.
Yeah, I was imagining the balloon, and if you don't address it, it's gonna pop. And I'm like imagining an aneurysm.
Yeah. Oh, it's yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you've been able to use hiking as an outlet as well.
Absolutely.
And with that community, have you been able to help other veterans?
I've hosted a few hikes for some of our veteran organizations up here, and I've also been on a backpacking excursion for veterans through Outward Bound. But I really find there's something beautiful for folks going through just trauma or crisis or adverse events. There's something wonderful about A, having nature as an ingredient, and B, that peer-to-peer safe support. And So there's some really wonderful magic that happens when you're in that safe environment, removed from everything and in nature. I think that's when we're able to open up and let the air out a little more.
For those listening that want to stay connected and follow you on social media and uh, you know stay connected so they know when they can buy your book, um, what's the best place for people? Is it your website?
Yeah, there's the website, which is my name with my middle initial, vickiemlanthier.com, or on Instagram is where I'm most active, or LinkedIn, both under Vickie M. Lanthier.
Well, I will have those links in the show notes. And I just really want to thank you for sharing so much with us today. And best of luck on your book. And sure, it's going to be amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review.